The first time they laughed at my windmill, it was because the blade squealed like an old screen door in a dust storm. By July, nobody in Dry Creek, Kansas, was laughing. The mayor had called it a rusted hazard. The councilwoman said it made our town look poor. A real estate man from Wichita offered to haul it away for free, like he was doing me a kindness by erasing the last thing my father ever built with his own hands. I didn't argue much. That was my flaw. I held my words too long, and people mistook silence for defeat. But under that bent tower, beneath 40 years of rust and red dirt, was something the town had forgotten. Water. And when the new pumps failed, when lawns turned gray and church ladies carried empty jugs to City Hall, that ugly old windmill started turning. The first time they laughed at my windmill, it was because the blade squealed like an old screen door in a dust storm. By July, nobody in Dry Creek, Kansas, was laughing. The mayor had called it a rusted hazard. The councilwoman said it made our town look poor. A real estate man from Wichita offered to haul it away for free, like he was doing me a kindness by erasing the last thing my father ever built with his own hands. I didn't argue much. That was my flaw. I held my words too long, and people mistook silence for defeat. But under that bent tower, beneath 40 years of rust and red dirt, was something the town had forgotten. Water. And when the new pumps failed, when lawns turned gray and church ladies carried empty jugs to City Hall, that ugly old windmill started turning. My name is Eli Warren, and I had lived on the west edge of Dry Creek for 61 years, give or take the months I spent in Topeka after my wife, Ruth, got sick. Folks in town knew me mostly by my truck, a faded blue Ford with one white door, because I never did find a matching replacement after a hailstorm took the original clean off its hinges. They knew my place too, 112 acres of wheat ground, scrub pasture, and a leaning red barn that looked worse from the highway than it was up close. And then there was the windmill. It stood behind the barn, just past the old cattle tank, tall and thin against the Kansas sky. The tower was silver once, back when my father raised it in 1978 with 3 neighbors, a borrowed gin pole, and more confidence than sense. By the time this story happened, rust had crawled up the legs like brown ivy. One blade was patched with tin from an old seed sign. Another had a bend in it that made the whole wheel wobble when the south wind came hard. My daughter, Claire, hated looking at it. "Dad, that thing's gonna fall on somebody," she said one Saturday morning, standing in my kitchen with a grocery bag on her hip. She was 34, a nurse in Garden City, and tired in the way good people get tired when life keeps asking for one more shift. Her little boy, Mason, sat at my table pushing a toy tractor through spilled cereal. "It stood longer than most roofs in this county," I said. Claire gave me that look Ruth used to give me when I was technically answering, but not really listening. "That's not the same as safe." I looked out the window. The windmill's tail flickered in the heat shimmer. The bearings had been singing for weeks, a dry metal chirp that carried all the way to the porch. I had grease for it in the shed. I had meant to climb up there. I had meant to do a lot of things before the drought got mean. Dry Creek was not a rich town. We had a feed store, a diner, 2 churches, 1 bank branch, and a grocery that still let old men pin handwritten notices beside the soda machine. People made jokes about leaving, then stayed another 20 years. That spring, the ponds shrank first. Then the ditches went powdery. By June, the city announced watering limits. By July, the mayor stood in front of a folding table at town hall and talked about emergency planning with a smile too polished for the room. Mayor Calvin Rusk liked new things, new signage, new sidewalks, new investors. He wore dress boots that had never stepped in manure and spoke about revitalizing rural identity like he had invented both words. He glanced at me during that meeting and said, "Some of our older properties still have outdated structures creating safety and image concerns." Nobody had to ask which structure he meant. A few people turned around. One man chuckled. I kept my hands folded over my hat and said nothing. That silence cost me more than I knew. 2 days after the town hall meeting, I found the first notice taped to my gate. Not mailed, not handed to me, taped there with blue painter's tape, flapping in the hot wind like a warning flag. Notice of unsafe agricultural structure. That was the heading. Underneath, in clean county-style language, it said my windmill was visible from County Road. 12 presented a possible hazard and negatively affected the appearance of the Dry Creek Improvement Corridor. I read that phrase twice because I couldn't decide whether to laugh or spit. Improvement Corridor. My father used to call that same road the washboard because it rattled the teeth in your head if you drove over 40. I folded the notice and put it in my shirt pocket. The wind had quit by then. No blade squeal, no tail clatter. Just the thick, breathless silence of a Kansas afternoon when even grasshoppers seem tired. I walked behind the barn and stood under the tower, looking up through the rusted cross braces. A smear of grease marked one leg where my hand had touched it years ago. The old cattle tank below it was dry, the bottom cracked into little clay plates. Mason used to toss pebbles in there when he was small enough to believe every hole held a frog. I heard a truck slow on the road. It was a white SUV with city decals on the doors. Mayor Rusk stepped out wearing sunglasses and a pale blue shirt pressed sharp enough to cut paper. Beside him was Linda Carver, the councilwoman who ran the bank committee and never missed a chance to say liability in public. "Eli," Rusk called, like we were meeting at church. "Calvin." Linda looked past me at the windmill. "That structure needs to come down before someone gets hurt. It's on my land. It's visible from public right-of-way," she said, "and visibility creates concern." I nodded once. Concern doesn't own a wrench. Rusk's mouth tightened, but he kept the smile. "Nobody's trying to disrespect your family history, but the town is moving forward. We've got outside interest now. A regional development group is considering a water infrastructure partnership, and things like this make Dry Creek look neglected." There it was. Not safety. Not really. Image. The same word folks used when they wanted poor people to hide the tools that kept them alive. A dusty pickup rolled by, slow. 2 teenage boys in the bed looked at the windmill and laughed. "Hey, mister," Warren one shouted. "You gonna fly away on that thing?" Linda did not laugh out loud, but her lips moved like she wanted to. I felt heat rise under my collar. For a second, I saw myself saying everything I had swallowed for years, about my father, about drought, about men in clean boots measuring worth by paint instead of purpose. Instead, I pulled the folded notice from my pocket. "How long?" Rusk seemed relieved. 30 days. I looked up at the still blades. Then I said the worst thing I could have said, because it sounded like surrender. "I'll look into it." By the second week of July, Dry Creek stopped smelling like summer. Usually, summer had a scent to it: cut hay, hot dust, motor oil outside the feed store, hamburgers from church fundraisers. That year, everything smelled baked flat. The air tasted like pennies. Even the cottonwoods along Miller's Draw curled their leaves inward, showing pale undersides like little surrender flags. The city watering schedule came first. Odd-numbered houses on Monday, even-numbered on Thursday. No sprinklers after 8 in the morning. No washing trucks. No filling pools. which mostly meant the mayor's subdivision folks complained louder than the farmers, because farmers already knew what a dry year could take. At the diner, people talked with their eyes on their water glasses. You hear the south well's down another 4 feet. School's canceling the car wash. My heifers are bawling all night. Nobody said panic. They didn't have to. It sat there between the salt shaker and the ketchup bottle. I kept working on the windmill in the early mornings before the heat came up. Not openly. Not with a big show. I'd climb the tower at first light with a grease gun hooked in my belt and a canvas pouch of tools knocking against my knee. The metal rungs burned my palms even before sunrise. Rust dust stuck under my fingernails like old blood. The trouble was, I didn't tell Claire. She called on a Tuesday while I had the gearbox cover open and both arms wrapped around the head of the mill. "Dad, where are you?" "Home." That's not what I asked. Wind slid through the tower and made the loose blade tick, tick, tick. "I'm handling something." She was quiet for a breath. Then I heard a hospital noise behind her, a cartwheel squeaking. Somebody coughing. A tired voice calling for room 214. "You missed the appointment with Dr. Bell." My stomach tightened. I had forgotten. It was just a follow-up. At least that's what I told myself right away, the way stubborn men patch shame with excuses, blood pressure, medication adjustment, nothing dramatic. Still, Claire had taken her lunch break to meet me there. "I'll reschedule." "You always reschedule when it's about you." Her voice cracked, "but only at the edge. But you'll climb a death trap for a piece of junk." I looked at the old wheel, half blind in the sun. "It's not junk." "Then explain it to me." That was the moment. I know that now. I could have told her about the old county map I remembered seeing in my father's desk. I could have told her the windmill wasn't ornamental, that it had drawn from a deeper vein before the town capped most of its shallow wells. I could have admitted I wasn't only saving rust and family pride. But the words crowded up and stopped behind my teeth. Claire sighed. "Fine. Keep your secret. Just don't expect me to bring Mason out there until that thing is gone." The line clicked dead. For a while, I stayed up on the tower with one hand on the warm gearbox, listening to the empty phone tone in my head. Below me, the dry cattle tank waited like a bowl nobody had filled in years. That was the first real price of my silence. The old map was not in the desk where I remembered it. That bothered me more than it should have. My father's roll-top desk sat in the corner of the front room, under a mounted barometer that had not told the truth since 1996. I opened every drawer, tax envelopes, twine, a cracked magnifying glass, 3 church bulletins from Ruth's funeral that I still had no strength to throw away. No map. By then, the drought had turned mean enough that people stopped pretending it was temporary. The elementary school put trash cans under drinking fountains because the pressure sputtered brown for a few seconds every morning. Pastor Glenn announced the church basement would open as a cooling room for seniors. At the grocery, bottled water sold out by noon, and folks who had spent all their lives being neighborly started counting cases in other people's carts. I heard about it from Earl at the feed store. "Rusk's got that Wichita outfit coming Friday," he said, sliding 2 mineral blocks across the counter. "Big presentation. Temporary tanks first. Then a new municipal tower if the state grant lands." "Where they putting it?" Earl looked at me over his glasses. "You know where." I did. The west rise near my property line. Same view corridor as the windmill? Earl lowered his voice. "Word is they'll condemn nuisance structures first. Makes the project map cleaner." I carried the mineral blocks out without answering. The heat hit my face like opening an oven door. That night, I went back through the house, not neatly this time. I pulled boxes from closets and stacked old paper on the kitchen table until the formica disappeared. Ruth would have scolded me for making a storm indoors when there was already one outside refusing to rain. Around midnight, I found my father's maintenance ledger in a cedar chest under quilts. The cover was black and soft at the corners from hand oil. Inside, his handwriting leaned hard to the right, sharp as fence wire. June 14th, 1978, set tower over Old County test bore. July 2nd, 1978, first draw, clear, cold. Better than South Well. August 9th, 1984, replaced leathers. Pump still strong at 186 feet. I sat there a long time with the refrigerator humming behind me. One line kept pulling at my eyes. Old County test bore. Not a family well, not a rumor, county. The next morning I drove to the courthouse in Larkin County, 22 miles east, where the records office still smelled like dust, toner, and floor wax. A young clerk with pink glasses told me groundwater files before 1980 were probably archived downstairs. Probably, I asked. She shrugged. That's government for maybe, but slower. It was the first time I laughed in weeks. She found the box after 40 minutes. Inside was a folded survey sheet, yellow at the creases. Stamped 1977. A blue line marked an underground draw running beneath the west edge of Dry Creek. Beside my parcel number, someone had written, "Test bore active wine-driven access point retained for emergency use." I touched the paper with one finger. For the first time, I understood my father had not built that windmill just for cattle. He had built it because somebody once knew the town might need it. I made 2 copies of that county sheet before I left Larkin. The clerk watched the old machine cough and flash like it was being asked to raise the dead. When the first copy came out crooked, she smoothed it with both palms and said, "You want another. This one looks like it lost a bar fight." "I've seen maps lose worse," I said. She smiled, and for a few seconds the whole building felt less heavy. On the drive home, I kept the original folder on the passenger seat with my hand resting over it at every stop sign. The land outside the windshield looked used up. Milo leaves curled tight. Pasture grass had gone the color of old rope. A cattle trailer passed me heading north. Empty hay nets swinging from the side rails, and I knew somebody had given up on keeping a herd through August. Back at the farm, the windmill stood still. That was the part nobody understood. A windmill did not save anybody by looking noble against a sunset. It needed seals, leathers, rod alignment, clean pipe, a working check valve, and enough patience to make a saint cuss under his breath. I had patience. Too much, maybe. I spent the next 3 days pulling the pump rods by hand with a tripod rig my father had welded from pipe. Each rod came up rusty and wet-looking, but dry to the touch, smelling of iron and old mud. My shoulders burned. My lower back barked every time I bent over. At night, I swallowed my blood pressure pill late and pretended that counted as responsible. Claire called twice. I let it ring once. Then I texted, "Working, I'll call tomorrow." That was a coward sentence, short enough to avoid truth, polite enough to pretend I had given her something. On Friday afternoon, Mayor Rusk held his infrastructure presentation at the high school gym. I went because Earl said the Wichita developers were bringing renderings, and because my windmill was on one of those renderings as a gray smudge marked removal area. The gym smelled like dust mop, warm plastic chairs, and nervous people. A big poster showed a clean white water tower rising behind fake green landscaping. Under it, the slogan read, "A modern future for Dry Creek." Rusk stood beside it, smiling like a man selling rain. "We cannot cling to outdated systems," he told the crowd. "Sentiment won't fill faucets." That line got a few nods. Then the developer, a narrow man named Brent Hollis, clicked to the next slide. My property appeared from above, outlined in yellow. The windmill was circled in red. A woman behind me whispered, "That's Eli's place." Brent tapped the screen. "This obsolete structure interferes with visual continuity and may complicate grant optics." I stood up before I planned to. The folding chair scraped loud across the gym floor. Rusk saw me and his smile thinned. "Eli, we'll have public comment after the presentation." I had the county map folded in my shirt pocket. I could have shown it right then. Instead, I looked at all those dry, worried faces and thought of Claire saying, "Then explain it to me." My hand stayed at my side. "Just wanted to hear it clear," I said. "You're calling the windmill obsolete?" Brent gave a small laugh. "Sir, with respect, that thing belongs in a museum." A few people chuckled. I nodded once and sat back down. In my pocket, the old map felt heavier than paper. The wind changed the next morning. Not much, just enough to move dust across the yard in thin, nervous ribbons. I was already behind the barn with the pump rods laid out on 2 sawhorses, wiping each joint with diesel and rags cut from Ruth's old gardening shirts. That detail would have made her mad if she had been there. Not because of the shirts, because she would have known I was using memory as a work cloth again. The new leathers had come from a supplier in Pratt, packed in a small brown box that smelled like oil and saddle shops. I soaked them, checked the cup, checked the plunger, and lowered the assembly back into the pipe inch by inch. By noon, Earl came by with a sandwich and 2 bottles of water. "You look like something a buzzard passed over for being too stringy," he said. "I'm touched." He nodded toward the tower. "You gonna tell folks what you found?" I tightened a rod coupling until the wrench bit my palm. "When it works. And if it doesn't?" The question hung there, honest and mean. I looked up at the windmill. One patched blade trembled in the hot breeze. Then I'll have earned the laughing. Earl didn't smile. By 3 o'clock, word had spread that I was messing with the old hazard. A few trucks slowed on County Road 12, then stopped. Men leaned on tailgates. A mother with 2 kids parked by the ditch. Somebody must have texted somebody, because by 4, Mayor Rusk's white SUV rolled up with Linda Carver beside him. Rusk walked over carefully, avoiding the grease and tools like they might stain his shoes by proximity. "Eli," he said, "this is not authorized work. It's maintenance. On a structure under review. Review doesn't turn bolts." Linda crossed her arms. "You're creating more liability in front of witnesses." The word witnesses made people glance at one another. I climbed the first few rungs anyway. My knee complained. My hands were slick with sweat. The tower gave its old groan. Not dangerous exactly, but loud enough to please everyone who wanted it to sound guilty. I reached the platform and set the brake loose. For a breath, nothing happened. Then the wheel turned. Once, twice. The patched blade came around with a wobble, and the gearbox made a rough, grinding squeal that scraped across the yard. Somebody laughed. "Sounds healthy." Brent Hollis called from near the road. I had not seen him arrive. More laughter. The wheel caught a stronger gust. It spun faster, too fast, before the tail swung crooked. I heard the snap before I felt it through the tower. One of the old blade braces sheared loose. The blade folded inward with a metallic crack and slapped hard against the wheel frame. The whole crowd jumped. Linda shouted, See what I mean?" I froze with one hand on the rail. Below, Rusk pointed up at me. face flushed now, smile gone. "Get down, Eli, this ends today." I looked past him toward the dry cattle tank, toward the pipe I had spent 3 days rebuilding, toward the town road lined with people who wanted me wrong because wrong was easier to understand. For the first time in weeks, I almost believed them. Then, from somewhere inside the pump column, I heard one small sound. Not water, not yet. A hollow knock, like something deep underground had finally answered back. Mayor Rusk brought the red tag himself. He did not tape it to the gate this time. He walked across my yard with Linda Carver, Brent Hollis, and half a dozen townspeople trailing behind like the decision needed, witnesses to become real. The tag read, "Stop work, unsafe structure." Rusk held it against one tower leg and smoothed the corners with his thumb. "Eli," he said, quieter than usual. "I gave you room. More than I should have." "No," I said. "You gave me 30 days and a crowd." His eyes flicked to the people near the road. That was the first time I saw something in him shift. Not regret exactly. More like a man hearing a floorboard creak in a house he thought was empty. Brent cleared his throat. "The development group can't proceed with active hazards in the corridor. This is a Grant Optics issue." "Brent," Earl called from his pickup. "If I hear optics one more time, I'm going to need a dictionary and a shovel." A few people snorted. Even in bad times, Dry Creek could find one dry laugh. Rusk ignored him. "The city is under emergency pressure. We need a reliable solution, not nostalgia." I climbed down slow, my shirt stuck to my back, hands black with grease. "That's fair," I said. The crowd quieted. Maybe because I agreed too easily. I walked to my truck, opened the passenger door, and took out the county folder. The original stayed inside a plastic sleeve. The copies were creased from my pocket. Rusk saw the stamp first. "Larkin County Groundwater, Survey 1977. His face did not change much, but his jaw stopped moving. I handed one copy to him. "Read the note by parcel 14-W. Linda leaned closer. Brent did too. Rusk read silently. Then again. Brent frowned. "What does wind-driven access point retained for emergency use mean?" "It means," I said, "this old hazard sits over a county test bore tied to the deeper draw under town." Linda shook her head. "That can't be active." "No," I said. "It wasn't active because nobody maintained the pump." Rusk looked up from the paper. For a second, his eyes went past me to the broken blade, the dry tank, the tower everyone had mocked. I learned later what happened next in his head. He had seen that same file 2 days before. Not the full folder, maybe, not my father's ledger, but enough. A scanned index at the county office, flagged by the clerk after I requested copies. Enough to know my windmill was not just scenery. And he had said nothing because a private doubt is easier to bury than a public mistake. Right then, the town siren gave one short burst from Main Street. Everybody turned. Linda pulled out her phone. Rusk's phone buzzed in his hand. Then Earl's. Then mine. The city alert came through in plain words. South Municipal Well, failure, conserve all water, emergency distribution plan pending. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind moving through the damaged wheel above us. Tick, tick, tick. Rusk lowered the county map. His voice came out smaller. "Can it pump?" I looked at the broken blade, then at the pipe. "If the wind holds," I said, "and if folks stop trying to kill it before it gets the chance." Repairing a windmill in front of the people who had laughed at it is a strange kind of church service. Nobody knows where to stand. Everybody wants a miracle, but nobody wants to admit they came needing one. The south wind kept pushing across the pasture in uneven breaths. Earl backed his pickup closer and handed me a length of flat steel from his toolbox. "This ain't pretty," he said. "Neither am I. Wasn't gonna mention it." That got a small laugh from the ditch line, but it faded quick. People were checking their phones, reading the city alert again like different words might appear if they stared hard enough. Rusk stood near the cattle tank with the county map in both hands. He had stopped performing. That was the biggest change. No polished smile, no infrastructure voice, just a man looking at a piece of paper that had become heavier than his plans. I climbed the tower with Earl holding the ladder and two younger men steadying the legs. The damaged blade had folded against the wheel frame, twisted at the brace. I wired it back enough to balance the spin, then bolted Earl's flat steel across the crack. It would not last years, maybe not even weeks. But it did not need years. It needed today. When I climbed down, my hands shook so badly I had to press them against my jeans. Claire's car pulled up as I reached the ground. She got out with Mason beside her. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her hair pulled back too tight. She took in the crowd, the red tag, the mayor, the tower. Then she looked at me. "You scared me," she said. 2 words. Not loud. Worse than loud. I had no defense left worth insulting her with. "I know." Mason slipped his hand into hers. "Grandpa, is it gonna work?" Children ask simple questions because adults make complicated messes around them. I looked at the wheel. "We're about to find out." Earl released the brake. The wind caught. The wheel turned once, scraping through the damaged spot. Twice. 3 times. The whole tower shivered. Linda stepped back. Brent held his phone up. Recording now. Maybe already planning how to explain a miracle he had mocked. At first, the pump only knocked. Hollow, slow, like a fist in a cellar. Then came a cough of air from the pipe over the cattle tank. Dust jumped. Another knock. A brown spit of water burst out and vanished into the cracked bottom. Nobody cheered yet. The wheel turned faster. The pipe coughed again, then gave a thin, trembling stream. Muddy at first, then clearer, colder. It hit the dry tank with a sound I had not heard in years. Water on metal. That sound went through the crowd softer than prayer. Mason whispered, "It's real." Claire covered her mouth. Rusk walked forward until he stood beside the tank. The stream kept running. Small but steady. Bright in the hard afternoon sun. He looked at me, then at the people gathered by the road. His throat worked before his words did. "I saw part of this file before today," he said. The crowd shifted. Rusk held up the county copy. "I saw enough to know Mr. Warren's windmill might have emergency value. I dismissed it because I didn't want an old structure complicating a new project." Linda stared at him. Brent lowered his phone. Rusk's voice thinned, but he kept going. "I called it obsolete. I was wrong. Worse than that. I was convenient." He turned to me. "And I owe you a public apology for making your father's work sound like trash." I looked at the stream filling the bottom of the tank. Then I said the only thing that felt true. Old things don't ask to be worshipped. They ask to be understood. That little stream did not save Dry Creek in one afternoon. Stories get cleaned up when people retell them. They make the water gush higher, the mayor fall harder, the old windmill shine like something from a postcard. Truth was smaller than that, and more stubborn. The windmill pumped enough to fill the cattle tank by evening, Then Earl helped me rig a hose line to 2 food-grade tanks the church brought out on a flatbed. Pastor Glenn organized a sign-in sheet. Claire took blood pressure readings under the shade of my barn because heat and fear had a way of squeezing people from the inside. Rusk called the county emergency office himself. To his credit, he did not hide behind Linda or Brent. He stood by the road with his sleeves rolled up, telling folks the water was for drinking, cooking, and medical need first. Not lawns, not pools, not washing dust off trucks. Some people grumbled. People always grumble when fairness reaches their own bucket. By the next morning, the state sent a water specialist, and the county confirmed what my father's ledger had already told me. The old test bore was legal for emergency draw under supervision. Temporary only. Controlled use only. No one was allowed to pretend my farm had become city property just because the town needed help. I made Rusk say that part twice. He did. The development group paused its project. Brent Hollis disappeared back to Wichita with his renderings and his grant optics. Linda Carver stopped saying liability for nearly a week, which some of us considered a separate civic blessing. As for the windmill, the town did not tear it down. They did not restore it into some shiny tourist symbol either. I would not allow that. We replaced the broken blade brace, rebuilt the break, and put a low fence around the tower with a plain sign. Emergency water access point, Warren Farm, steady use, 1978. No bronze plaque, no ribbon cutting. My father would have hated a ribbon. Claire came out 3 evenings after the first water run. Mason walked ahead of her carrying a drawing he had made in blue crayon, the windmill, the tank, and me standing too tall beside it. Like children draw people they love. Claire leaned against the porch rail. "You could have told me," she said. "I know. That's not an apology." "No," I said, "it's the doorway to one." She looked at me for a long time. The sunset put gold on one side of her face and left the other in shadow. Then she handed me a small pill organizer from her purse. "Start with taking these on time." So I did. Not because I suddenly became an easier man. I didn't. Stubbornness doesn't leave just because water comes back. But some repairs start with a hinge, some with a seal, some with an old man letting his daughter be right about one small thing. By September, rain finally came. Not enough to erase the drought. Enough to settle the dust. And some evenings, when the wind moved right, that rusty wheel still turned above the pasture. Not loud. Not proud. Just steady. Like it had been waiting all along for the town to remember how to listen. Before we close, I want to leave you with one simple lesson from this story. Never underestimate the value of things or people that seem old, quiet, or overlooked. In a world that constantly chases what is new, we sometimes forget that wisdom is often built through years of patience, sacrifice, and experience. The rusty windmill wasn't important because it looked impressive. It mattered because someone cared enough to maintain it, understand it, and preserve its purpose. The same is true for relationships, traditions, and even the people around us. Sometimes the greatest strength is hidden behind the things others dismiss. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen someone or something underestimated prove everyone wrong? I'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoy heartfelt rural stories about resilience, justice, and quiet courage, please subscribe to the channel and join our community for more inspiring journeys.